Have you ever felt like there are two versions of you living inside the same person? One that wants to do what is right and one that keeps pulling you in the wrong direction. You make a decision, you feel strong about it, you say, this time is different, and then you feel later that you're back at the same place again. You know what is right, but you don't always choose it. You want peace, but your mind feels restless. You want consistency, but you feel divided. At some point, whether you say it out loud or not, you start asking a deeper question. What is wrong with me? Because it feels personal. It feels like something inside of you is not working the way it should. Last week, we said something very important. You were created very good. You're created with a purpose. You were created in the image of God. Your worth was not something you earned. It was given. So now the question becomes, if that is true, why do I feel like this? Why is there this tension inside of me? Why do I feel pulled in two different directions? The Bible does not ignore that question. It actually explains it. The answer does not start with you. It starts before you. Genesis 3 tells us what went wrong on earth, but scriptures also shows us that the problem did not begin here. Before there was brokenness in humanity, there was rebellion in heaven. There was a created being, Lucifer, who lived in the presence of God in a perfect environment with no lack, no pain, no insecurity, and yet something started to grow inside of him. Pride, jealousy, a desire for a position that was not his. Isaiah described his thoughts. I will ascend. I will raise my throne. I will make myself like the Most High. That is not just ambition. That is a rejection of God's place. Instead of trusting God, he wanted to replace God. And that same spirit led him to spread his ideas to others. The Bible described this as his spreading his influence, his trade. His thinking, he began to question God's character, to suggest that God was limiting, that God's authority was restrictive, that there was a better way to live outside God's design. Eventually, this led to conflict in heaven. Revelation describes a war, a conflict of loyalty, trust, and truth. And Lucifer and those who followed him were cast out. Now, the rebellion that began in heaven comes to earth. Now, here is a question people often ask, and it is an honest question. If God knew all of this would happen, why didn't he stop it in the beginning? Why create Lucifer if he knew Lucifer would rebel? Why allow any of this to unfold? Because if we are honest, that is what we would do. If something threatens what we love, we remove it quickly. But God does not operate out of fear. He operates out of truth and love. The issue in heaven was not just behavior, it was trust. Lucifer was spreading a lie about God, about who God is, suggesting that God could not be trusted, that his authority was limiting, and that life would be better outside of his design. If God immediately removed Lucifer, the question would remain in the minds of every created being. Is God just eliminating opposition? Is Lucifer right? Is God hiding something? So instead of forcing obedience, God allowed the consequences of rebellion to be seen fully. Not because he wanted suffering, but because he wanted the truth to be clear. God is not trying to control love, he's protecting it. Because love only works when it's chosen freely. And for love to be chosen freely, truth has to be real. That means the alternative has to be exposed. And that is why the story unfolds the way it does. Not because God is distant, but because he is relational. He's not building a system of forced loyalty. He's revealing his character in a way that every created being can see and choose for themselves. And we are living in that moment of the story. And this is where Genesis 3 enters the story. God had created Adam and Eve in a perfect environment. Everything they needed was already provided. They had a direct relationship with God. They were not guessing who He was. They knew Him. He spoke to them. He walked with them. He warned them about the danger. He gave them one boundary, not as a trap, but as a protection. Because love without choice is not love. And obedience was not about control, it was about trust. And then comes the moment that changes everything. The serpent speaks, and the temptation is very specific. You will be like God. Not just eat something, but become something. Take control, define reality for yourself. Decide what is right and what was wrong in your own terms. And here's what is important. They were not uninformed. They knew God. They knew His voice. They knew His instruction. This was not ignorance. This was a choice. They chose to trust the voice of the serpent over the voice of God. And the moment they made that choice, everything shifted. And what shows up first is not external punishment. It is an internal brokenness. The Bible says they realized that they were naked and they hid. Shame entered human experience. Before sin, they were fully known and not afraid. After sin, they felt exposed and afraid. They hid from God. They hid from each other. And when God came looking for them, something else appeared. Blame. And Adam says, the woman you gave me. Adam here is actually blaming God. Eve says, the serpent deceived me. Responsibility is replaced with deflection. Relationship is replaced with distance. Trust is replaced with fear. And this is not just their story. This is your story. This is my story. This is why you feel what you feel. Because something inside humanity broke at that moment. And you live with the effects of that every day. That is why you can know what is right and still struggle to do it. That is why you can love God and still feel distant. That is why you want to change and still repeat patterns. That is why Paul described this internal conflict so clearly when he says, the good I wanted to do, I do not do. But the very thing I hate, I keep doing it. That is not weakness. That is brokenness. And it has an explanation. You were created whole, but you are living in a broken story. And this also explains something else. Why the world around you feels the way it does. Because if life is disconnected from God, then everything starts to shift. Instead of selfless love, we move towards selfishness. Instead of trust, we move towards control. Instead of seeing people as valuable, we start seeing people as competition. And you see this everywhere. In small ways, like stepping over someone to get ahead. In large ways, like conflict, violence, and systems built on power and survival. The idea that only the strong survive begins to shape how people think and act. But that is not how we were created to live. That is the result of separation from God. And here is something important to understand. God did not create evil. Evil is what happens when created beings choose to move away from God, who is the source of our goodness. Just like darkness is not something created, it is the absence of light. Evil is the absence of God's presence in a choice. And God allowed that possibility because He gave real freedom. He did not want robots. He wanted real love. But real love always comes with real risks. And we are living in the consequences of those choices. So when you feel that tension inside of you, when you feel divided, when you feel like part of you wants God and part of you resists Him, understand this. That is not your identity. That is your condition. There is a difference. Your identity is still rooted in God, but your condition has been affected by sin. And if you confuse those two things, you will either excuse everything you do or you will condemn yourself completely. But the Bible gives a clear picture. You were created good, but something has been broken. And here's the part that changes everything. The moment sin entered, God did not step away. He stepped in. He came looking for Adam and Eve. He called them, he covered them, he made a way forward. Even in Genesis 3, you begin to see the beginning of a plan that would eventually lead to Jesus. Because God was not willing to leave humanity in a broken condition. But before we talk about what God does, we need to be honest about what we usually do. Because when we feel this tension inside of us, we don't stay neutral. We try to fix it. Some people try to fix by doing better, trying harder, becoming more disciplined, more consistent, more spiritual. Others go to the opposite direction. They stop trying. They distract themselves. They avoid it. They fill their lives with noise so they don't have to think about what is happening inside. And both of those responses have something in common. They are both attempts to deal with the tension on your own, either by effort or by escape. And for a while, it can feel like it works. You improve a little, you feel more in control, or you stay busy enough that you do not feel as much, but eventually the tension comes back. Because the problem is deeper than behavior. It is just what you do. It is what is happening inside. And this is where many people get stuck. They spend years trying to manage something that actually needs to be restored. And if you don't understand that, you will either live exhausted from trying or disconnected from avoiding. But neither one leads to peace. Because peace does not come from fixing yourself. It does not come from ignoring yourself. There has to be another way. So if you feel divided, if you feel guilty, if you feel shame, if you feel like you are fighting yourself, there's an explanation. You're not crazy. You're not alone. You are living in a broken story. But that is not where the story ends. If something is broken, the real question is not just how to fix it, but who can fix it. Because what you're dealing with is not just behavior, it's not just habits, it's something much deeper. And no amount of trying harder has been able to fully resolve it. So the question becomes, what has God done about it? Next week, we are going to look at what God actually did in response to this. Not what you do for God, but what God has done for you. Because if the problem is deeper than behavior, then the solution has to be deeper too. If you're watching this later on YouTube and you wanted to be part of this live, check the description below. You will find the information there on how to join us every week. I would love for you to be part of the conversation, not just watch it. I would love to see you next time.